I never meant to find them. My husband's private notes about our marriage were never meant for my eyes. But there they were, pages and pages of his deepest fears. Not that I was cheating, not that I'd leave him for someone younger, but that I was settling for him, sacrificing my dreams to be his wife. The part that broke me? He was planning to leave me, not because he stopped loving me but because he thought it would set me free. Everyone thinks we have the perfect marriage. That's what my friend Lisa told me last week over coffee, eyes glinting with something between admiration and envy. 7 years and you two still look at each other like that? Ethan is just so attentive. I nodded and smiled, the practiced response of a woman who's heard this countless times. My husband, the devoted pediatric surgeon who still makes time to surprise me with fresh flowers and thoughtful notes. Me, the rising architect whose renovation of our 1920s craftsman home was featured in last month's Design magazine. We are that couple, successful, attractive, and apparently rock solid. What nobody sees is how Ethan's eyes now slide away when I ask about his day. How he started working late on Tuesdays and Thursdays without explanation. How the space between us in bed has grown into a canyon I don't know how to cross. Earth to Mira, Lisa waved her hand in front of my face. I asked if you two had plans for your anniversary next month. Oh, we haven't really discussed it yet, I admitted, stirring my now cold coffee. Ethan's been swamped with a difficult case, and I've been focused on the Singapore project proposal. Lisa's eyebrows shot up. Singapore? You'd relocate. The question hung in the air between us. The truth was, the international fellowship would be career-defining, leading the sustainable renovation of a historic district. The kind of opportunity architects dream about. But I hadn't even mentioned it to Ethan yet. It's just a possibility, I said quickly. Probably won't happen anyway. Later that evening I stood in our kitchen, chopping vegetables with mechanical precision. Through the archway I could see Ethan in his favorite leather chair, laptop balanced on his knees. His brow was furrowed, lips pressed into a thin line. He'd been like this for weeks now, physically present but mentally elsewhere. Dinner in 20, I called. He nodded without looking up. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked toward him, determined to break whatever invisible barrier had formed between us. Tough day. No, just catching up on some research. His fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard. You've been doing a lot of research lately. I kept my tone light, casual. It's important to stay current. His response was equally measured, equally empty. I perched on the arm of his chair and leaned slightly against his shoulder. Want to talk about it? The research, I mean. For a brief moment something flashed across his face. Panic? Guilt? Before I could identify it he snapped the laptop shut. It's nothing interesting, he said, standing abruptly. Actually, I should clean up before dinner. Give me 5 minutes. As he disappeared upstairs I stared at his closed laptop on the chair. We used to share everything, the good, the bad, the mundane details of our days. When had we started keeping secrets? The timer on the oven chirped, calling me back to the kitchen. I tried to focus on finishing dinner, but my mind kept circling back to that moment of panic in his eyes. Whatever was on that screen, he definitely didn't want me to see it. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, I stared at the ceiling and catalogued the changes. He still kissed me goodbye each morning. Still asked about my projects. Still remembered to pick up the special detergent I liked. But somewhere along the way, the current beneath our interactions had shifted. The ease was gone, replaced by a carefulness that felt suffocating. Are you happy? I whispered to his sleeping form. He didn't stir. Our bedroom walls were the exact shade of blue I'd agonized over for weeks, wanting the perfect color to create calm, to make this space our sanctuary. Now I wondered if I'd been designing the perfect backdrop for a slowly disintegrating marriage. My phone lit up on the nightstand, a reminder about tomorrow's presentation to the board. Beside it lay my tablet, which I rarely used anymore except for quick sketches. On impulse I reached for it, thinking I might review my presentation notes one more time. The screen came to life, automatically syncing with our shared cloud storage. And there, in the recently updated files, was a folder I'd never seen before. Myra's Freedom.docs. Last edited by Ethan Lancaster, 10:37 p.m. Tonight. While I was cooking dinner. My finger hovered over the file, heart suddenly pounding in my throat. Whatever this was, he clearly didn't intend for me to find it. I should respect his privacy. I should wait and ask him directly. But something about those two words, virus freedom, turned my blood to ice. I tapped the file. The document opened slowly, each loading second stretching my nerves tighter. What would Myra's freedom contain? Divorce papers? Confessions of an affair? My mind raced through worst-case scenarios as the text finally appeared on screen. It wasn't what I expected. Not even close. Day 742 of our marriage was when I first noticed it. Mira declined the Richardson competition without telling me. When I asked why, she said it wasn't important enough to disrupt our plans for your parents' anniversary. That was the first sacrifice I caught. How many came before that I missed? I stared at the words, confusion replacing fear. This wasn't about Ethan wanting freedom from me. It was about me? I scrolled down, heart pounding. She used to sketch building concepts until 3 a.m. when inspiration struck. Now she's in bed by 11, alarm set for 6, perfect routine like clockwork. She used to argue passionately about sustainable design with anyone who would listen. Now she smiles politely when my colleagues make ignorant comments about pretty buildings. She's becoming a ghost of herself, and I think it's my fault. My hands trembled slightly. I hadn't realized he'd noticed these changes. I hadn't even fully recognized them myself. I found her old portfolio today while looking for tax documents. The margins are filled with wild ideas, notes about pushing boundaries, and revolutionary spaces. Her new work is technically brilliant but safe. When did safe become her standard? When did wife of Dr. Lancaster replace Mira Chin, visionary architect? A lump formed in my throat. I glanced at Ethan's sleeping form, his face peaceful in the dim light from the tablet. How long had he been cataloging these observations? And why hadn't he said anything? I hesitated before scrolling further, suddenly feeling like an intruder in my own marriage. This was clearly Ethan's private journal about our relationship. I should stop reading. But then a folder name caught my eye in the sidebar. Exit strategy. My finger moved before I could reconsider. The folder contained spreadsheets, documents, and flight confirmations. I opened the first document. Timeline for transition. June 15th. Give notice at St. Mary's. June 30th. Begin paperwork for international medical certification. July 10th. Finalize one-way ticket. August 1st. Tell Mira. One-way ticket? I clicked on the flight confirmation. A single ticket in Ethan's name, departing August 3rd to Singapore. My mind struggled to make sense of the information. Ethan was planning to leave in less than 2 months. He had already given notice at the hospital where he'd worked for the past 5 years. And somehow it was connected to Singapore, the very place I'd been secretly considering for my fellowship. How did he even know about that opportunity? I'd only discussed it with my mentor, Raphael, and hadn't submitted a formal application yet. I navigated back to the main folder and noticed another subfolder labeled Myra's Career. Inside were dozens of files, scans of architectural journals with my name mentioned, screenshots of the Singapore Fellowship announcement, and email exchanges with Raphael. I opened the most recent email. From Raphael Diaz. To Ethan Lancaster. Subject. Virus potential. Ethan. I appreciate your concern, but as I've said before, Mira needs to apply for the Singapore Fellowship herself. Your assessment of her work is spot on. She has exceptional talent that's being underutilized in her current position. However, I can't nominate her without her express interest. That said, if she does apply, I'll ensure the committee recognizes her innovative approach to sustainable historic preservation. Her concept sketches that you shared, with her naive attribution to a colleague that fooled no one, were precisely the fresh perspective this project needs. Perhaps instead of orchestrating opportunities behind the scenes, you should simply talk to your wife? Bess. Raphael. My breath caught. Ethan had been in contact with my mentor about my career? Had shared my work without telling me? The betrayal stung even as confusion mounted. This didn't align with a husband planning to abandon his wife. It seemed more like, what exactly? A new file type caught my attention in the folder. Audio recordings. The first was titled, Day 145 Without Telling Mira.mp3. I grabbed headphones from my nightstand, careful not to disturb Ethan, and pressed play. His voice came through clear and intimate, as if he were whispering directly into my ear. It's been 145 days since I realized I'm holding her back. Mira turned down the guest lecture series at Columbia because the commute would mean less time at home. She said it wasn't important, but I saw her face when the announcement came out. That spark in her eyes just dimmed. There was a pause, the sound of ice clinking in a glass. I keep waiting for her to say something, to push back against this life we've created that's slowly suffocating her talent. But she just keeps accommodating, keeps adjusting herself smaller and smaller to fit what she thinks I need. Another pause, longer this time. I love her too much to be the reason she looks back at 70 and wonders what could have been. Even if it means. His voice broke and the recording ended abruptly. I stared at the list of audio files, each labeled with a different day count. Dozens of them spanning more than a year. My husband wasn't having an affair. He wasn't leaving me for someone else. He was planning to leave me. For me. With shaking fingers, I pressed play on the next recording, dated 3 months earlier. Day 73 without telling Mira. I watched her on the phone with that developer today, the one who wanted to modify her design to save costs. She used to fight for her vision until the bitter end. Today she just agreed. Said, whatever works for the client, with that professional smile that never reaches her eyes. I remembered that call. The developer had wanted to replace the sustainable materials with cheaper alternatives, compromising everything the project stood for. But we just put a deposit down on the lake house renovation, and the commission would cover it perfectly. It had seemed like a reasonable compromise at the time. I played the next file. Day 89. Found Myra's old sketchbooks in the attic while looking for Christmas decorations. The margin notes made me sit down right there between dusty boxes. Architecture that challenges how we live, not just where we live. When did she stop talking like that? When did I stop listening for it? A heaviness settled in my chest. I hadn't opened those sketchbooks in years. Day 112. Ran into Professor Hanlon from Myra's graduate program. He asked about her revolutionary community housing concept, and whether she'd developed it further. I had no idea what he was talking about. She's never mentioned it to me. Had to pretend I knew. Looked it up when I got home. It's brilliant. Why doesn't she talk about these ideas anymore? Is it because I come home talking about saving children's lives and she thinks her work seems trivial in comparison? Have I made her feel that way? I pressed a hand to my mouth. The community housing project had been my thesis. Low-cost, sustainable urban living spaces that transformed according to residents' needs. 4 years after graduation, I'd tinkered with the designs, dreaming of making it reality. When had I shelved those plans? Why had I never shared them with Ethan? File after file revealed a husband increasingly concerned about his wife's diminishing ambitions. As the timestamp moved closer to present day, Ethan's voice grew more desperate. Day 203. I did something stupid today. Called Raphael, Myra's old mentor. Asked what happened to that fiery student he used to brag about. He seemed confused, said she's still producing good work. When I pressed about her innovative ideas, the silence was damning. Finally said, marriage changes priorities for some people. Wanted to reach through the phone and shake him. It's not marriage that should change who you fundamentally are. I winced. Raphael had never mentioned this call to me. Day 217. I'm practicing different ways to ask Mira about her dreams without sounding patronizing. Listen to this. Hey, remember that community housing concept? Whatever happened with that? Ethan's voice shifted to an artificially casual tone that made me smile despite myself. No, that's terrible. How about, I was thinking about your work lately and realized I don't know where you see your career in 5 years. What's your dream project? He groaned audibly. That's even worse. So forced. Maybe, if money and time weren't factors, what would you be designing right now? There was a pause. God, I sound like a bad self-help book. Why is this so hard? Why can't I just ask my wife about her dreams without making it weird? A laugh escaped me, quickly muffled by my hand. Even in my shock and confusion, something warm bloomed in my chest. This was the Ethan I knew, overthinking, earnest, desperate to get things right. The next recording was from just 2 months ago. Day 261. The Singapore opportunity is perfect for her. Sustainable renovation of historic buildings. It's everything she's passionate about. Raphael thinks she'd be the top candidate if she applied. But she hasn't even mentioned it to me. I saw the email notification on her phone when she was in the shower. She read it, starred it, and has done nothing. But what is she afraid of? I closed my eyes. I'd convinced myself the timing wasn't right, that moving internationally would be too disruptive to Ethan's established career at St. Mary's. I hadn't even given him the chance to weigh in. Day 300. I've made a decision. If Mira won't pursue her dreams because of me, then I need to remove myself as an obstacle. The Singapore Fellowship is still open for applications. I've researched hospitals there that need pediatric surgeons. The medical certification will take time, but I could teach initially. My heart pounded as the pieces finally aligned. The exit strategy, the one-way ticket, the international certification paperwork. He wasn't abandoning our marriage. He was planning to follow me to a job I hadn't even applied for. The final recording was from last night. Day 347. I can't keep watching her shrink herself to fit into this life. Every time she silently accommodates, every time she puts my career ahead of her ambitions, it's like watching someone slowly erase themselves. I love her too much to be the reason she disappears. I have to let her go even if it kills me. His voice broke on the last sentence, raw with emotion. Tomorrow I'll finalize the timeline. I'll tell her after our anniversary. I'll make it clear that this isn't about us failing. It's about giving her the freedom to soar again. Maybe someday when she's achieved everything she's capable of, we can find our way back to each other. But I have to let her go first. The recording ended, leaving me in silence save for the sound of Ethan's steady breathing beside me. I looked at my sleeping husband through tear-blurred vision, this man who loved me so much he was willing to break both our hearts to set me free. Freedom I never asked for. Freedom I didn't even know he thought I needed. I returned to the main folder, still reeling from the recordings. There had to be more to understand some piece I was missing. Another subfolder caught my eye. Evolution of Mira.docs. The file opened to reveal meticulous notes, almost scientific in their precision, documenting changes in my behavior over our 7 years together. The attention to detail was both touching and unnerving. Year 1. Mira works until inspiration fades regardless of time. Forgets dinner plans twice because she's lost in a design. Apologizes but doesn't actually seem sorry. Laughs when I point this out. Says her brain doesn't have space for social schedules when the creative flow is happening. I find this endearing if occasionally inconvenient. Year 3. Mira now sets alarms to remind herself to stop working. Cancels late meetings if they conflict with dinners with my colleagues. Says it's just being considerate, but I miss how her eyes used to light up when she talked about losing track of time in her work. Year 5. Mira declined invitation to speak at architectural conference because it conflicted with my parents' anniversary weekend. When I suggested she go anyway and meet us after her panel, she said, "Family comes first now." Never mentioned the conference again. Year 7. Mira now plans her work schedule around mine. Has transformed into the perfect wife. Organized, supportive, always available when I need her. Maintains our social calendar, remembers everyone's birthdays, cooks healthy meals. Hasn't stayed up past midnight working on a passion project in 16 months. My stomach tightened. Had I really changed that much? I'd always seen these adjustments as natural maturation, the necessary compromises of building a life together. But lined up in Ethan's careful documentation, they looked more like a systematic dismantling of the person I once was. I scrolled down to find a list titled, in Ethan's typical dorky but endearing fashion, Wild Mira vs. Wife Mira. A field guide to my disappearing spouse. Wild Mira has passionate debates about design ethics that make dinner guests uncomfortable. Wife Mira smoothly changes the subject when architecture comes up at social gatherings. Wild Mira wears paint-splattered jeans to fancy restaurants because inspiration struck, and she forgot to change. Wife Mira maintains a separate client meeting wardrobe and always looks appropriately professional. Wild Mira calls me at 2 a.m. to describe a building she just dreamed about in vivid detail. Wife Mira puts her phone on Do Not Disturb at 10 p.m. so we both get proper rest. Wild Mira cries at beautiful buildings, reaches out to touch interesting textures everywhere we go. Wife Mira takes discreet photos for reference and maintains appropriate public decorum. Wild Mira once said she'd rather design one revolutionary building than 100 safe ones. Wife Mira talks about client satisfaction and practical constraints. I let out a shaky breath. The woman he was describing, both versions, was unmistakably me, yet somehow I hadn't noticed the transformation happening. Each adaptation had seemed minor, reasonable, the kind of adjustments anyone makes in a serious relationship. But Ethan had noticed. And apparently he missed the chaotic, passionate architect he'd married. The next section hit even harder. Possible reasons for Myra's transformation. 1. My fault. She thinks a surgeon's wife should be perfect and organized. C. Comments from Dr. Winters about how lucky I am to have such a supportive spouse. 2. My fault. I've been too absorbed in my career and haven't given her space to be messy and creative. C. My 80-hour workweeks during fellowship. 3. My fault. She thinks her work is less important than saving children's lives. C. Her diminishing references to her own accomplishments after I discuss difficult cases. 4. My fault. She's bored with me and is just going through the motions, least likely but most terrifying possibility. 5. My fault. She doesn't feel secure enough in my love to know I'd choose her wild, inconvenient passion over her perfect, accommodating domesticity any day. My vision blurred with tears. Every possibility he'd considered placed the blame squarely on himself. Not once had he considered that I might be responsible for my own choices, or that I might have changed for reasons that had nothing to do with him. I wiped my eyes and continued reading, finding a section that made my heart constrict. Evidence that the real Mira still exists. Still touches buildings everywhere we go when she thinks I'm not looking. Sketchbook hidden in bottom drawer of her nightstand has radical designs dated last month. Eyes still unfocus in that specific way when she's mentally redesigning spaces around her. Gets that little smile when students approach her after guest lectures. Still has all her old manifesto notes from grad school in a box labeled someday. He'd been cataloging evidence that the real me was still alive somewhere beneath the polished surface of the woman I'd become. Like a scientist gathering proof for a theory he desperately hoped was true. At the bottom of the document was a final note, added just yesterday. Found international fellowship recommendation form in Raphael's office when dropping off Myra's portfolio yesterday. Filled it out myself. Forged her signature. If she's angry, at least that will be genuine. And if she goes, maybe she'll remember who she really is, even if it's without me. My hand flew to my mouth. Ethan had submitted an application to the Singapore Fellowship in my name? Had forged my signature? I should have been furious. Instead, I felt something else entirely. A complicated tangle of emotions I couldn't immediately identify. Beneath this confession was a scanned document. The recommendation letter Raphael had apparently written for my forged application. I skimmed it quickly, chest tightening at phrases like, unparalleled innovative approach, and one of the most visionary minds of her generation. The letter painted a picture of an architect I used to recognize. Bold, passionate, uncompromising in her vision. Someone who would never let practical concerns like a spouse's career limit her ambitions. I looked up from the tablet, suddenly desperate for air. When had I stopped being that person? And why was my husband so determined to bring her back that he'd risk our marriage to do it? The clock on the nightstand showed 2:17 a.m. I shut off the tablet and lay back, staring at the shadows on our bedroom ceiling. Next to me, Ethan slept peacefully, unaware that I'd discovered his secret project. His plan to sacrifice our life together for what he believed was my freedom. Part of me wanted to wake him immediately, to confront him with the evidence of his well-intentioned betrayal. But a deeper instinct held me back. I needed time to process, to understand my own reactions before I faced him. By morning I had a plan. I would prepare his favorite breakfast, create a space for honest conversation, and carefully, gently broach the subject of his notes. We would talk, really talk, for the first time in what felt like years. I slipped out of bed early, practiced what I would say while showering, and headed to the kitchen to start the coffee. As I reached for Ethan's favorite mug, my phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Singapore application deadline final day. My hand froze midair. Today was the final day to submit supplementary materials for the fellowship Ethan had already applied to in my name. The fellowship that had sparked this entire cascade of secret plans and misguided sacrifices. Before I could process this new urgency, Ethan appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work, hair still damp from his shower. "Morning," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I need to head in early for a department meeting." I'll grab coffee at the hospital. I felt the carefully constructed plan crumbling. Ethan, wait. I thought we could. The doorbell interrupted me. We both froze, equally confused by an unexpected visitor at 7:30 a.m. Are you expecting someone? Ethan asked. I shook my head and moved toward the door, opening it to find Ethan's parents standing on our porch, luggage in hand. Surprise! Eleanor Lancaster exclaimed, throwing her arms wide. We decided to come early for your anniversary weekend. Behind me, I heard Ethan's sharp intake of breath. His parents weren't expected until next month for our actual anniversary. Mom, Dad, he managed, stepping forward to embrace them. This is quite a surprise. Within minutes, our quiet house transformed into a flurry of activity. Eleanor unpacked snacks from her travel bag while George settled into the living room, already reaching for the remote. We figured we'd surprise you both, Eleanor explained, bustling around our kitchen with the comfortable familiarity of a mother who still considered her son's home an extension of her own. George is retiring next week, so we thought, why not make it an extended celebration? We can help with anniversary plans. I caught Ethan's eye across the kitchen. His expression was unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. This unexpected visit had derailed both of our plans. His secret exit strategy and my confrontation. That's wonderful, I said, the words hollow in my ears. We're so happy to have you. Ethan, his father called from the living room. What's this about you giving notice at St. Mary's? Peterson mentioned something when I called to get your schedule. The kitchen fell silent. Eleanor's hands stilled over the coffee maker. My eyes locked with Ethan's, seeing panic bloom there. You quit your job? I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer from his notes. When were you going to tell me? Eleanor looked between us, maternal instinct instantly detecting the tension. Oh dear, did I? Have you two not discussed this yet? Ethan's jaw tightened. It's complicated, Mom. Can we talk about this later? But his father had already appeared in the kitchen doorway, newspaper in hand. Later? Son, you've given up a premier surgical position. Your mother and I thought you were being considered for department head next year. I was, Ethan said tersely. Then why would you? George, Eleanor interrupted, placing a warning hand on her husband's arm. I think we should give them some privacy to discuss this. Nonsense, George said. We're family. If Ethan's making career decisions, we should all talk about it. Especially if he hasn't even told Mira yet. The irony of this statement, Ethan keeping secrets about my career while I kept secrets about his secrets about my career, might have been funny in another context. Now it just tightened the knot in my stomach. Actually, I said carefully, I'd like to hear about this too. When did you give notice, Ethan? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from moments of extreme stress. 2 weeks ago, he admitted. I was going to tell you after. After what? I pressed. After I figured out how to explain it, he finished, not meeting my eyes. Eleanor, ever the peacemaker, clapped her hands together. Why don't we all have breakfast? I brought those pastries you love from that bakery near our house, Mira. Everything seems less dramatic with a full stomach. Somehow we found ourselves seated around our dining table, the four of us maintaining a veneer of normalcy while avoiding the elephant in the room. Eleanor chatted about neighborhood gossip. George complained about the retirement party his colleagues were planning. Ethan picked at his food, silent and withdrawn. I moved through the motions on autopilot, pouring coffee, answering Eleanor's questions about my recent projects with vague pleasantries. Inside, my mind raced, trying to calculate how to navigate this unexpected complication. So, George finally said, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate firmness, are you going to tell us the real reason you're throwing away your career, son? Is there a problem at the hospital we should know about? There's no problem, Dad, Ethan said, his voice tight. It was simply time for a change. A change to what, exactly? George pressed. Ethan's eyes flickered to me, then away. I'm exploring options. Options, his father repeated skeptically. At your age? With your reputation? You don't just walk away from. George, Eleanor warned. It's about Singapore, I said suddenly, the words escaping before I could reconsider. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me in surprise. Singapore. Eleanor echoed. Ethan's face had gone pale. Mira. I've been offered a fellowship there, I continued, the half-truth flowing easily. A career-defining opportunity. Ethan's been looking at hospitals there, haven't you? That's what your exit strategy is all about. The moment the words left my mouth, I realized my mistake. Ethan's coffee cup clattered against his saucer, his eyes widening in shock. Exit strategy? He repeated. How did you? Exit strategy? George interrupted. What the hell is going on here? Eleanor reached for her husband's arm. Perhaps we should give them some privacy after all. But it was too late. The careful facades we'd all been maintaining had cracked, revealing the messy truth beneath. Eleanor's attempts to defuse the situation failed spectacularly. After 20 uncomfortable minutes of stilted conversation, she finally managed to drag George out for a spontaneous tour of the neighborhood, leaving Ethan and me alone in a kitchen thick with unspoken accusations. The front door had barely closed before Ethan turned to me, his expression a complex mixture of hurt and confusion. You know about the exit strategy, he said. It wasn't a question. How long have you known? I leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. Since last night. And the Singapore Fellowship? Have you been planning to apply all along? No, I admitted. I considered it, but I didn't think it would work with your career here. Ethan's face tightened. So you just decided that for both of us? Without even mentioning it. The irony of his indignation wasn't lost on me. That's rich coming from the man who's been documenting my evolution for years without saying a word. Who forged my signature on an application. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. You found the notes. All of them, I confirmed. The document tracking my transformation into the perfect wife. The recordings about setting me free. The flight confirmation for your one-way ticket to Singapore. Ethan sank into a kitchen chair, burying his face in his hands. This isn't how I wanted you to find out. Really? How exactly did you plan to explain that you'd quit your job and booked a flight without consulting me? Surprise, honey, I've decided to blow up our lives because I think you've lost your spark? The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. Ethan looked up, his eyes pained. That's not fair, he said quietly. I was trying to. To what? Save me from myself? Rescue me from the horrible fate of being your wife. To give you a chance at the life you deserved. His voice rose, frustration finally breaking through his composure. The life you were headed for before you met me. Before you started shrinking yourself to fit into what you thought I needed. I crossed my arms tightly over my chest. Did it ever occur to you that I made my own choices? That maybe I wanted the life we built? Did you? He challenged. Can you honestly tell me you don't miss the person you were before? The architect who wanted to revolutionize urban living, not just design pretty houses for rich clients. The question hit like a physical blow. I turned away, unable to hold his gaze. I saw it happening, he continued, his voice softer now. Year by year. The compromises that seemed so small individually but added up to you losing yourself. And the worst part was you did it for me. Because of some idea that my career had to come first, that my work saving children somehow made your dreams less important. I never said that, I protested weakly. You didn't have to. It was in every decision you made. Every time you turned down an opportunity because it might inconvenience me. Every time you downplayed your achievements around my colleagues. I wanted to argue, but the evidence he'd compiled made a devastatingly convincing case. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning since I found his notes. Why didn't you just talk to me? Ethan ran a hand through his hair. I tried, Mira. 100 different ways. Remember when I asked about your community housing concept last year? You said it was just a student project, nothing practical. When I suggested you apply for that teaching position at the university, you said it would take too much time away from home. I did remember. I dismissed his questions as casual interest, never recognizing them as attempts to reconnect me with my former passions. So instead of pushing harder, you decided to, what? Sacrifice our marriage? Move to Singapore on the off chance I'd follow and magically rediscover myself. I was going to tell you everything, he insisted. After the fellowship acceptance came through, I was going to show you that you could take this opportunity, that I'd support you completely, even if it meant starting over somewhere new. By presenting me with a fait accompli. Good news, honey, I've already blown up our life here, so you might as well take that job? Ethan flinched. When you put it that way, it sounds manipulative, controlling, just a different version of making decisions for me. I was trying to remove obstacles, not create new ones, he said defensively. I've watched you talk yourself out of opportunities for years. Always with practical reasons that somehow centered around my needs or my career. I wanted to take that excuse away. We stared at each other across the kitchen, the gulf between us suddenly vast and uncharted. And what if I didn't want the fellowship? Asked finally. What if I didn't want to move to Singapore? What was your plan then? Ethan's shoulders slumped. I don't know, he admitted. I didn't let myself think that far. I just knew I couldn't keep watching you disappear. The raw honesty in his voice broke something inside me. Anger gave way to a more complicated emotion. A recognition that beneath his misguided methods lay a love so profound it frightened me. You should have trusted me with the truth, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And you should have trusted me with your dreams, he countered. When did we stop being partners, Mira? When did we start protecting each other from ourselves? The question hung between us, unanswerable and damning. I don't know who we are anymore, I said finally. The perfect surgeon and his accommodating wife? The passionate architect and her supportive husband? Which version is real? Ethan reached across the table, not quite touching me. Maybe the better question is, who do we want to be? If we could choose again, knowing what we know now, what would we choose? I looked at this man I'd been married to for 7 years, seeing him with new clarity. The depth of his observation, the intensity of his care, the misguided but profound love that had driven him to such desperate measures. Do we even know each other anymore? I asked, the question breaking from the deepest part of my doubt. Morning light filtered through our kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the remnants of breakfast. Ethan's parents had called to say they were having lunch with old friends, a transparent excuse to give us space. The silence in their absence felt both oppressive and necessary. Ethan and I moved through the house like cautious strangers, orbiting each other without making contact. I retreated to my home office, ostensibly to work, while he disappeared into the guest room with his laptop. The distance between us measured more in unspoken words than physical space. Around noon, I found myself drawn to our bedroom, to the tablet that had revealed so much the night before. I reopened the folder of Ethan's notes, searching for something I might have missed. Behind the main documents was another subfolder I hadn't noticed. Why I Love Her. My finger hovered over it momentarily before tapping. Inside were dozens of short text files, each dated going back to the beginning of our relationship. I opened the most recent one. March 17th. Caught Mira standing in the rain today in the backyard, face tilted up to the sky, getting completely soaked. When I asked what she was doing, she said, feeling the architecture of raindrops. That's who she really is. Someone who experiences the world differently than anyone I've ever known. Even after 7 years, she surprises me. Even after all the ways she's tried to make herself more conventional, these glimpses of her true self still emerge. It's like watching a wild creature that's been domesticated suddenly remember its nature. These moments are becoming rarer. I'm afraid someday they'll stop completely, and the woman I fell in love with will be gone forever. Tears pricked at my eyes. I opened another file, this one from our first year of marriage. November 4th. Mira fell asleep at her drafting table again. Found her with pencil marks on her cheek and a half-eaten sandwich forgotten beside her. When I carried her to bed, she mumbled something about cantilevers that sing without waking up. I've never loved anyone who lives so completely in her passion. It's terrifying and exhilarating to be chosen by someone like her. Someone who could be consumed by her work but chooses to make space for me too. Another from 2 years ago. July 30th. Argument with Dad about Myra's career. He suggested she should consider more family-friendly hours, if we're thinking about kids. I saw that look cross her face, the one where she's biting back her real thoughts. Later I asked what she wanted to say. The flood of passionate ideas about integrating childcare spaces into workplace design, about challenging the false dichotomy between professional and personal life. It was breathtaking. She's thought deeply about how to be both a mother and an architect someday, refusing to accept the limitations society puts on either role. That's my wife. Always redesigning the world instead of just accepting it as given. File after file revealed a husband who didn't just love me but saw me, truly saw me, even when I'd stopped seeing myself. who treasured exactly the qualities I'd been systematically suppressing in my quest to become the perfect wife. A soft knock interrupted my reading. I looked up to find Ethan in the doorway, hesitant and vulnerable in a way I rarely saw him. "I found something," he said, holding up a leather portfolio I recognized immediately. My heart sank. "Where did you get that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It was hidden behind your winter coats." I wasn't snooping, I just needed space to think and ended up reorganizing the closet. A nervous habit of his, organizing things when emotionally overwhelmed. The portfolio contained what I'd come to think of as my someday projects. Designs too ambitious, too unconventional for my current clients. Dreams I kept private even from myself. "Hey, Ethan gestured to the space beside me on the bed. When I nodded, he sat down carefully, maintaining a small distance between us. He opened the portfolio, revealing sketches dated just 3 months ago. Concepts for sustainable community housing that evolved directly from my graduate thesis. "You've been developing it all along," he said softly. "In secret." I nodded, unable to find words to explain why I'd hidden this part of myself even from him. Especially from him. "Why didn't you tell me?" His question echoed mine from yesterday, completing a circle of mutual secrets. "I thought you'd find it impractical," I admitted. "A pipe dream." "You thought I wouldn't support it?" "No, it wasn't that." I struggled to articulate feelings I'd barely acknowledged to myself. It was more that these designs represent a different path. One that might not align with the life we've built. One that would require sacrifices. Risks. Risks you didn't think I'd be willing to take, he finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. "We have a good life, Ethan. Stable. Comfortable. Your career is established. Mine is solid, if not exactly revolutionary. Pursuing these ideas would mean starting over in many ways. So you protected me from having to choose," he said, "the same way I tried to protect you by making plans without consulting you." The parallel wasn't lost on either of us. We'd both been making assumptions, both trying to shield the other from difficult choices, both ultimately undermining the partnership we'd promised each other. Ethan closed the portfolio and turned to face me fully. "I think we need to date each other again." "What?" "Not literally, though dinner without my parents would be nice." A small smile flickered across his face. "I mean, we need to rediscover who we are now, not who we were when we met or who we've been pretending to be." The idea resonated more than I expected. "How do we do that?" "Let's start by being honest. Completely honest, even when it's uncomfortable." He took a deep breath. "I'll go first. I've been miserable at the hospital for the past year. Not because of the work itself, but because I've felt trapped by the prestige, by my father's expectations, by the life we've constructed around my career. Quitting wasn't just about freeing you, it was about freeing myself too." The confession hung between us, an offering and a challenge. My turn. "I miss being bold," I said, the words emerging from a place I'd kept locked away. "I miss fighting for ideas that matter to me. I miss waking up with design problems I can't solve and staying up all night trying anyway. I miss who I was before I became so careful." Ethan nodded, eyes never leaving mine. "What else?" "I resent that your work saves lives and mine just makes things prettier," I admitted, the truth like glass in my throat. "I know it's petty, but sometimes when you talk about your patients I feel irrelevant." Instead of dismissing my feelings, he simply asked, "What else?" And so it began, our reconstruction. 4 hours we traded truths like currency, each confession buying us a step back toward each other. Some revelations were painful, others surprisingly funny. We ordered pizza when we got hungry, eating cross-legged on the bed surrounded by the evidence of our separate secret lives. As evening fell, Ethan reached into his nightstand and pulled out a folded paper. "Our wedding vows," he explained. "I thought we might." He didn't need to finish. I took my half of the paper and together we read the promises we'd made 7 years earlier. Promises about partnership, honesty and growing together, not apart. When we finished, Ethan looked at me with eyes that held no secrets. "I still choose you," he said simply. "Not the perfect wife or the brilliant architect, but you, all of you, however you want to be." I reached for his hand, intertwining our fingers. "I choose you too. Not despite the difficulties, but with them. With all of it." It wasn't a resolution, not yet. But it was a beginning. 3 months later, our house looked like a war zone. Half-packed boxes everywhere, furniture displaced, walls bare where our art had hung. In the middle of the chaos, Ethan and I sat on the floor of our living room, surrounded by moving checklists and travel documents. "Did you call the shipping company about the drafting table?" Ethan asked, checking off items on his tablet. "Yesterday. They're coming on Thursday." I taped shut another box labeled Kitchen, Non-Essentials. "Did you finish the paperwork for your teaching position? Just needs your signature on the housing forms." He passed me a document. 6 months as a visiting professor while my certification processes, then I can apply for hospital privileges. I scanned the housing agreement. A faculty apartment near the Singapore University campus where I'd be leading the historic district renovation. My fellowship had been announced 6 weeks ago, setting our plans into concrete motion. After our confrontation and reconciliation, we'd made a joint decision. I would accept the fellowship opportunity and Ethan would come with me, not as a sacrifice but as a deliberate choice we made together. His position teaching pediatric surgery would keep his skills sharp while giving him more regular hours than he'd had in years. We'd both have a chance to redefine ourselves away from the patterns and expectations we'd fallen into. "Found another one," Ethan called from the hallway where he was emptying the hall closet. He emerged holding a small piece of paper. "It was tucked inside your winter coat pocket." I knew what it was before he handed it to me. One of the notes I'd started leaving for him around the house in the weeks after our reconciliation. Small reminders of who we really were beneath the roles we'd been playing. This one read simply, "I'm proud of your hands. They save lives. Mine just draw lines on paper, but you've never made me feel less for it. I'm sorry I didn't see that sooner." Ethan smiled, tucking the note carefully into his shirt pocket. "I've kept every one." It had become our new ritual. These notes hidden throughout the house for each other to find. Sometimes serious, sometimes playful, always honest. A way to practice the transparency we'd promised each other. "Oh, before I forget," I said, reaching for my phone. "We should record today's memo while we're thinking about the move." Another new habit. Joint voice recordings capturing our thoughts, fears, and hopes as we navigated this transition. A deliberate counterpoint to Ethan's secret recordings from before. Now we spoke our truths aloud to each other, preserving them as touchstones for the future. I pressed record and Ethan's voice filled the space between us. Day 94 of our reconstruction project, he began, using the term we'd adopted for our renewed relationship. "Current status. Organized chaos. Mira keeps insisting we need to bring her collection of concrete samples. I maintain that Singapore has its own concrete." I laughed, picking up the thread. "Ethan has packed 14 essentially identical blue dress shirts but claims there's no room for my material samples. Clearly, priorities are still being negotiated." "Seriously though," Ethan continued, his tone softening, "I've been thinking about what we're really bringing with us versus what we're leaving behind. The physical stuff is easy. It's the other baggage that's trickier." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "I've been worried about falling back into old patterns, about becoming the accommodating wife in a new setting. And I've been worried about being too cautious with you, afraid to push or challenge you for fear of shutting you down," Ethan admitted. "Old habits are hard to break even when you recognize them." This was the purpose of our recordings, to name our fears, to speak them aloud before they could fester into new secrets. "What I'm not afraid of," I added, "is whether this is the right choice. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm moving toward something instead of just maintaining what we have." Ethan reached across the boxes between us, taking my hand. "Me too. It feels like breathing after being underwater, making choices because they excite us, not because they're expected." We continued the recording, discussing practical concerns about the move and deeper anxieties about starting over in a new country. When we finished, Ethan saved the file to our shared cloud folder. A growing archive of our journey accessible to both of us always. That evening, Ethan's parents came by to help with the packing. The initial shock of our decision had given way to reluctant support, especially once Ethan explained how the teaching position aligned with his long-term career goals. His father had even made some calls to physician colleagues in Singapore, arranging introductions. "I still don't understand why you need to move halfway around the world," George grumbled as he taped a box shut. "But I suppose if you've both made up your minds." "We have, Dad," Ethan said firmly. No trace of the hesitation that had once characterized his interactions with his father. This is the right move for both of us. Eleanor, more perceptive than her husband, caught my eye across the room and smiled softly. You seem different, Mira. More present somehow. I smiled back, recognizing the truth in her observation. I feel more present. More myself. Later, after his parents left, Ethan and I stood on our back porch, looking at the garden we'd tended together for years. In the moonlight, the familiar space seemed both precious and temporary, a chapter closing but not forgotten. Any regrets? Ethan asked, his arm around my shoulders. I considered the question seriously, giving it the weight it deserved. Not about going. Just about how long it took us to be honest with each other. He nodded, understanding. No more secret plans to save each other. No more sacrifices the other person didn't ask for, I agreed. We stood in comfortable silence, contemplating the path that had led us here. Our relationship had nearly broken under the weight of good intentions and silent compromises. The reconstruction was ongoing, imperfect, but built on a stronger foundation. The morning of our departure, I woke early, restless with anticipation. Ethan still slept, his face relaxed in the gray dawn light. I slipped out of bed and went to my desk, pulling out a notepad to leave him one final message in our old home. In careful architect's lettering I wrote, Ethan, marriage isn't what I thought it was when we started. I believed it meant gradually becoming what the other person needed. Adapting, accommodating, smoothing my edges to fit perfectly against yours. I thought love meant sacrifice. I understand now that true partnership isn't about becoming less so the other can be more. It's about creating space where we both expand, challenge each other, grow in directions we couldn't have anticipated alone. Thank you for loving me enough to risk losing me. Thank you for seeing me even when I'd lost sight of myself. I don't know exactly who we'll become in this new chapter, but I know we'll discover it together. Eyes open, voices heard, hearts unguarded. All my love. The architect who still cries at beautiful buildings and always will. I folded the note and placed it on my pillow where he would find it when he woke. Then I went to make coffee, ready to begin our last day in the home where we'd almost lost each other, and in doing so found something stronger. As the sun rose fully, casting long shadows across our half-empty house, I felt a sense of lightness I hadn't experienced in years. Not because our problems were solved or our future certain, but because we'd finally learned the truth that had eluded us for so long. Love wasn't about protecting each other from life's complexities, it was about facing them together, unafraid of what we might discover. When Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, note in hand and emotion in his eyes, I knew he understood too. Without words, he crossed to me, pressed his forehead against mine, and simply breathed with me in the quiet morning light. Hours later, as our plane lifted off toward Singapore, toward our uncertain but deliberately chosen future, I reached for Ethan's hand. He squeezed back, a silent confirmation of the promise we'd remade to each other. No more perfect facades. No more silent sacrifices. Just two imperfect people choosing each other anew each day, building something stronger than either of us could create alone.